Thank you for asking me to read something, Stephen. Unfortunately, as staff, I did not get to take the master classes, so I'm a bit jealous of everyone who did. But when thinking about your work, Iain, I decided to read a very brief kind of character sketch from Whitechapel's Scarlet Tracings. And I first want to begin by reading you a bit of the blurb on the back that was written by W. Webb at The Guardian. And I think this kind of is very atmospheric for today. So he says, in this extraordinary work, Sinclair combines a sort of spiritual inquest or seance into the Whitechapel Ripper murders and the dark side of the late Victorian imagination with another plot thread, done in hectic picaresque of a posse of seedy book dealers hot on the trail of obscure rarities of that period. So when I was told this morning, which feels like 4 years ago, that poor Hilary was catapulting herself through London to collect the books, I imagine these seedy book dealers and you somehow going into this, this landscape yourself. And hopefully you haven't encountered this particular character that I'm going to read from here. And I think also I just want to say that, Iain, with your work, I always feel I have been Kerouac by the end of reading as well. So this has that kind of rhythmic sense to it as well. So here we encounter a very interesting character called Mossy Noonmans. Mossy Noonmans' bookshop, if we afford it the courtesy of that title, was probably the only one open in the whole of the Midlands, from Wolverhampton to Boston and out into the North Sea. And he was the least likely proprietor. How he had come here nobody knew, and few cared to guess. He stood, stooping, a few inches under the low ceiling of his ill-lit empire, lacquered in dry sweat, glistening. He had found a role to suit his height, and he was quite prepared to play it. He affected the trappings of the trade, as they might have been described in a 1930s detective novel. An unruly pipe, the stem almost bitten away, sucked, spat through, poked at, scraped, cleaned into the filthiest stick of tar, unlit and frequently pocketed in a condemned floral waistcoat. His face had a shocked and naked quality, as if he had been covered for years in a helmet of hair and then suddenly and judicially exposed to the light. His skull was heavy, water-filled, and tended to come to rest on one or other of his shoulders. It was impossible to believe that the stock in his shop had been selected with any notion of trading in it. It was as if every other dealer within 50 miles had been allowed to tip one sack of their most leprous and flaky dogs onto his floor. The shelves, being decent timber, had long ago been sold. There were typed cards announcing literature, philosophy, postcards, crime, movie stars, war, and fashion. But these, having been so laboriously produced, were dropped anywhere. 2 good ideas in one day was too much to cope with, and the cards now bore no relation whatever to the heaps on which they lay. Mossy's nose was a thing to be admired. He admired it. He looked after it better than he looked after his family. He would pick at the lining with a matchstick, roll out an interesting lump, either of skin or of snot or food, then gasp for breath after his exertions. He would mop himself with a shirt-sized handkerchief. Perhaps it was a shirt. It must have been a very old one. He was the only person to find Stenford tropical. He dripped with the effort of striking a match and let it burn out in his fingers. Most of Mossy's business had once been transacted on the telephone until that instrument had been cut off, literally. Mossy took his pocket knife to the cord and severed it, tying a ticket to the bone. It was a realistic view. Everything has its price tag, and it might as well be visible. Now Mossy took to appearing at auction houses. He haunted the rooms, watching the bidders, selecting a likely novice with a nervous arm, and begging a lift just up the road being the A1. His benefactor, in a state of hysterical paralysis, was persuaded to chauffeur Mossy to the very door of his shop, then to enter, to carry in a box. The fact that it was the driver's own box seemed always to be overlooked. The order of release could only be obtained by purchasing a decent heap of coverless old volumes and first editions with additional printing histories thoughtfully erased, scarce issues put out by book clubs. It was always when Mossy threatened to brew up a large mug of coffee that the checkbooks appeared and another neophyte was broken in. Noonman was a New Yorker, veteran of Peace Eye Bookstore, who, not fancying an engagement in Southeast Asia in the mid-60s, had returned to the Europe of his forefathers by way of Liverpool, then briefly the center of the universe. A single evening disproved this conceit. Noonman found a mattress in Westbourne Grove. There were minor misunderstandings over rent books, Social Security paperwork, import-export regulations concerning self-administered resins from the Middle East. There was a misplaced briefcase of ounces, and Mossy decided to hit the road. Thank you.